The first sign wasn't a robot. It was an empty chair under dead fluorescent light. A server rack sits in the cubicle, glowing softly, like it belongs there. Its fans breathe steady, while unreadable dashboards flicker blurred tiles and red warning glyphs. The evidence implies something brutal. Coordination is being automated, not just tasks. Your promotion ladder depends on junior roles and middle managers to exist. If those rungs vanish by 2032, where does the middle class stand? Seal broken, file open. In 2025, most people mistake capability for control. Generative AI writes, summarizes, and drafts, then waits for your next prompt. Agentic AI does not wait. It plans, calls tools, executes steps, and escalates exceptions. The shift is simple to describe and hard to accept. Workflows stop being documents humans move through. They become entities that move through the company on their own. By the end of 2026, forecasts put task-specific agents inside 40% of enterprise apps. That matters more than any single model release or demo. It means autonomy gets baked into procurement, finance, support, and logistics software. It means the assistant quietly becomes the operator of the system. The geopolitical race sharpens the mechanism. Western ecosystems push open models and fast interoperability across vendors and partners. China pushes state-aligned stacks that bind identity, compliance, and deployment into one rail. Different philosophies, same outcome. Whoever owns the agent layer owns the labor layer. This dossier is not about job loss as a headline. It is about the silent erasure of junior roles and middle management as a category. So who's the employee? Workflows hire themselves. Why now? Autonomy becomes default. You see the first signal in the hiring dashboard, not the lab. Open roles freeze, then backfill becomes a forbidden word in 2025. Teams keep their headcount, but lose their junior pipeline quietly. The illusion remains. Copilots make you faster, so you stay in control. The incentives say otherwise. In 2025, most enterprise software is already a workflow machine. Tickets, invoices, approvals, shipments, and exceptions are standardized tokens. Once agents can read those tokens and call tools, coordination collapses. It stops being a job ladder and becomes a throughput problem. The second signal is product strategy turning into labor strategy. In 2024, vendors showcase autonomous agents as digital teammates. One ecosystem shows customers building over $10,000 showers, agents in a single event. Another ships autonomous agents across finance, supply chain, and service work. That is not a feature. That is a new staffing model wearing a software badge. The trigger is governance and risk becoming urgent, not optional. By February 2025, Europe's AI rules begin applying in phases. By August 2025, obligations for general-purpose AI start biting providers. Banks begin planning customer-facing agent trials for early 2026. Regulators warn about speed, autonomy, and accountability gaps in real time. Geopolitics turns this into a race over rails, not chatbots. Western stacks favor open ecosystems, fast plugins, and interoperable agent tools. China favors state-aligned deployment with identity, compliance, and model control fused. Different ideologies, same logic. Whoever sets the rails sets the behavior. By the end of 2026, forecasts put agents inside 40% of enterprise apps. Some projects fail, and many are canceled by the end of 2027. But the direction does not reverse, because the incentives do not reverse. This is where control quietly changes hands. Black box: how agents run work. Agentic workflows are not smarter chat. They are planners wired into tools, permissions, and feedback loops. Think of it like giving a junior analyst a keyboard and 1,000 hands. Then the analyst never sleeps, never forgets, and never stops iterating. Old work moved through humans like paperwork through a hallway. A ticket arrived, someone read it, then forwarded it to the next desk. New work moves through systems like electricity through a circuit. An agent reads the ticket, selects tools, and executes steps automatically. The mechanism is simple in structure and dangerous in scale. First, an agent decomposes a goal into a task tree. Second, it calls tools across email, chat, CRM, ERP, and procurement portals. Third, it verifies outputs with tests, logs, and second agents. By 2026, that orchestration becomes a default feature in enterprise software. This is where middle management gets targeted by design. A manager's real job is triage, escalation, and enforcing policy. Agents do triage faster, and they never get tired of edge cases. They route exceptions to a human only when confidence drops. That turns supervision into a thin layer of approvals and audits. The bottleneck is not intelligence. It is access, reliability, and accountability under real-world constraints. Agents fail when tools change, permissions are incomplete, or data is missing. They fail when a single wrong action creates irreversible damage. In 2027, most firms still limit autonomy with guardrails and kill switches. But the guardrails tighten around the workflow, not around the human job. Once execution is cheaper than meetings, the organization rewires itself. The ownership layer. You open a procurement ledger and see agent seats priced like headcount. The payment line is not salary. It is cloud spend and licenses. That is where power lives when labor becomes rented software at scale. 3 layers matter: models, tool access, and distribution inside enterprise suites today. Open ecosystems win by interoperability, letting agents hop across vendors and partners. Closed stacks win by control, binding identity, compliance, and compute into one rail. In February 2025, Europe's AI bans begin applying, and companies feel it. By August 2025, general purpose model obligations activate, forcing governance into procurement. Regulation becomes a lever because it decides which agent can ship legally. Gartner expects task-specific agents in 40% of enterprise apps by 2026 globally. It also says that is up from less than 5% in 2025. Those numbers shift boardrooms because every workflow becomes a unit of margin. Cloud platforms sell autonomy as an add-on, then meter it like electricity. ERP vendors embed agents into approvals, so switching platforms becomes operational pain. Logs become the new compliance theater because audits can lag behind automation. By end of 2027, over 40% of agentic projects get canceled internally, but the survivors harden into infrastructure, and the rest of the org adapts. Follow the rails, and you find who owns tomorrow first. In the West, open weights and plugins spread fast through contractors and supply chains. In China, State-aligned deployment ties models to identity rails and permitted behaviors. Either way, middle roles vanish when the system can self-coordinate at speed. Standards decide whose agent can talk to whose infrastructure without friction tomorrow. When a port, bank, or hospital chooses a stack, it locks dependencies. That lock is why the middle class feels it last and loses first. 2026 to 2036, the latter disappears. The layoffs won't be announced. They'll be scheduled. By 2026, the first flips happen in back offices after midnight. Agents clear invoice queues, chase missing paperwork, and reopen stuck tickets. Teams stop hiring juniors because throughput rises without adding headcount. The work still exists, but the entry ramp quietly collapses. Roadmaps target the same 3 gains across every department by 2028. Cycle time drops because agents don't wait for meetings or approvals. Costs fall because the labor line shifts into metered compute and licenses. The labor shape changes because humans become exception handlers, not doers. By 2029, a single operator can oversee a dozen parallel workflows. Procurement agents request quotes, compare suppliers, and draft contracts automatically. Finance agents reconcile anomalies and prepare audit-ready packets in hours. Support agents resolve routine cases and escalate only low-confidence edge cases. Middle managers get recast as reviewers of exceptions and policy drift. Between 2030 and 2031, supply chains feel the change as coordination evaporates. Dock appointments, replenishment orders, and dispute resolution compress into machine time. An internal memo calls it frictionless operations. The real name is autonomy, replacing the human routing layer. Then the system-level shift hits in 2032, and it compounds fast. Machine counterparties start negotiating with machine counterparties as a default. Pricing, lead times, and compliance checks become continuous, not episodic. By 2034, governance lags behind execution because audits remain human speed. By 2036, the latter is thinner than anyone admits publicly. Junior roles exist, but they are temporary and tightly scoped. Middle management survives as a thin membrane of accountability over autonomous work. This is where the middle class stops being promoted and starts being rented. 2037 to 2046, life after stability. By 2040, work feels less like a career and more like a subscription. The system still needs humans, but it buys them in narrower slices. It purchases oversight, judgment, and liability, not routine execution. You follow a human anchor through a normal week in 2042. He is a 33-year-old operations analyst in a mid-sized U.S. distributor. His old job was coordination, calls, approvals, vendor chasing, and daily triage. Now his dashboard shows unreadable tiles, abstract charts, and confidence bands. He starts at 6:30 a.m., not to work, but to review agent decisions. He approves 3 exceptions, rejects 1, and writes 1 policy constraint. At noon, an agent flags a supplier as high risk and reroutes inventory. By 2 p.m., the reroute saves money, but breaks a long-term relationship. He feels the weight because the system moves faster than explanation. He adapts by learning 1 skill, setting rules that machines must obey. The benefit is real and measurable in FROZ's 2039 to 2044. Shortages shrink because agents detect risk earlier and diversify suppliers. Fraud drops because workflows verify documents continuously, not quarterly. Consumers see faster delivery and fewer errors, even during disruptions. The loss is quieter and more corrosive. Entry-level ladders don't rebuild, so social mobility thins out. People rotate contracts, stack gigs, and chase certified oversight badges. The middle class stops being a broad layer and becomes a narrow credential class. Point of no return arrives when liability attaches to the agent stack itself. By 2045, firms can't revert without breaking service levels and compliance. This is the paradox. Autonomy reduces chaos, but concentrates control. When the workflow becomes the entity, the human becomes the add-on. Verdict, power, risk, and what follows. The system looks efficient because it is replacing negotiation with execution. But three structural risks harden as autonomy becomes the default. First, brittleness grows when many workflows share the same agent rails. One bad update can propagate faster than any human escalation chain. Second, black boxes deepen as decision trees become model behaviors. Accountability becomes a report, not a person, and that changes discipline. Third, control concentrates where compute, data access, and distribution converge. The winners are the owners of the stack, not the operators of the work. There is a controlled upside that is real if governed properly. Autonomy can shrink waste, reduce fraud, and stabilize supply in crises. It can make boring work disappear without collapsing service quality. But the gains only become civilization-level benefits if policy exists. Without redistribution, autonomy becomes a private engine of inequality. This is where the story stops being about technology. The verdict is not that jobs vanish overnight. It is that the middle layer becomes optional in software architecture. The ladder disappears first, then the identity that ladder created. The question that remains is ugly and practical. When the economy runs on agent labor, what funds human stability? The lever. Platforms that control models, tools, and distribution rails. The bill. Households paying through lost ladders and unstable careers. Point of no return? Liability. And compliance locking autonomy into infrastructure. You close the file. The numbers are real. The timelines are closing. Whatever path we choose, the future has already begun assembling itself. Piece by time, 0.3s, irreversible, peace, while most of the world is still looking the other way. This was only one dossier. Many more are waiting.